Hi, everyone. I hope everyone is having a good week thus far and enjoying the cooler weather. Hopefully, there is some cooler weather happening where you are. So today I will be giving a book presentation on Child of the Dark, the Diary of Carolina Maria de Jesus. And so I'll be covering the text as well as the impact and themes that I saw were prevalent, in the reading. So first, I want to cover Carolina herself. So she was born in 1914 and passed in 1977, and was born to a family of sharecroppers who were also descendants of slaves. And she moved to Sao Paulo, favela in 1947, which led to her keeping a diary of her daily life. And so Child of the Dark was published in Portuguese in 1960, and it was published in English in 1962. And as of 2015, it's been translated into 13 languages, and it's also nationally acclaimed. And for some more recent things that I found is that in 2015, the Afro-Brazilian Museum in Sao Paulo held a 6-month exhibition on her life and work. Which I thought was really amazing. And I also learned that there has been many things inspired by her work, including plays, music compositions, education, things of that nature. In 2020, the Outskirts Literary Festival was held in her memory, and that was actually the 60th anniversary of the publication of Child of the Dark as well. So noting that her text or diary, rather, publication was the first publication to talk about the daily life in the favelas as someone who is living in the favelas or have lived in the favelas. Her work has created great impact. So for the text itself, it covers the daily life living in the favela, as it is essentially her daily journal. Some days she wrote and some days she didn't, as we saw that there's a jump through time, but it's pretty consistent. And it covers the daily life of living in the shanty town and favela, and the lack of resources, which includes having to travel for water, the lack of food and resources, and things of that nature. And I thought that there were some major things that she written that really highlights the life that was led in the favelas. But also I include some of them in this presentation, but I feel like the way that she writes, it doesn't include just herself, but it also includes other people as well. And I think that for the reader, at least for myself, really allows me to really imagine the environment in full, not just what she is living, but also the possible lives of other people that she includes. And so I find it interesting because certain things that she knows really highlight greater themes. And so it's not just about poverty also, but it's also how the lack of resources and the lack of food and the lack of money and the lack of just proper housing and living can be tied to this history of slavery, right? Or this idea of citizenship, which I'll bring up later. And so I have a couple quotes, but one of them is the price of food keeps us from realizing our desires. And actually we're slaves to the cost of living. And she consistently says that she's tired or that she doesn't feel well, that she's ill, and this idea of like being plagued with trying to survive, right? So in the preface of the text, it covers the formation of favelas and talking about the major waves of migration into cities looking for jobs after the emancipation of slavery. And there's a lack of jobs due to discrimination of people who have agricultural backgrounds, or this idea that you need to have certain levels of education, that there are certain requirements like speaking Portuguese. And so being turned away, many people created housing in nearby areas outside of Sao Paulo, for example. So including that also, I thought was really important to connect to our previous readings, because we have talked about this idea of migration and this idea of rural development versus city development and how that's changed across time. And so what does it mean to have a history that we hear not only in Brazil in the text that we read, but also in common narratives of the West, right? Or in regions, or as like time passes by, the industrialization of cities, that people move and there's jobs. But it really highlights the question of what happens for people who are not able to get jobs, and what happens when there's still systems of marginalization that keep them from being able to access those jobs, right? And so another thing that she says that again highlights this history is on May 13th, 1958, which is the anniversary of emancipation or abolition, that on that day, instead of celebrating, she is still fighting against the slavery of hunger and not having, food. So other themes that pop up in the text, excuse me, other themes that pop up in the text, while including daily life, include gender, and this idea of she is a mother, she has children, and how she expresses her drive to be able to support her families, but also often talking about other women, and that there's women who give and they create community and they can speak with each other. And then there's other women who are often both the providers of their homes and their families despite having husbands, right? Or they're also women that are there and they are mean and they're full of resentment. And so that brings to like the greater theme of the idea of poverty fueling resentment towards each other, and the idea of robbery and violence being prevalent due to being plagued by poverty, and this us versus us, or me versus me mentality that can happen. Also, alcohol comes up a lot as I see it reading the text as alcohol as this way of escaping, this idea that people are drinking to drown out their woes, but she often talks about how like it changes you, and it also can impact survival because then your money goes towards that, right? And I really thought that that led to the resilience that she really has, and she illuminates when talking about her daily life. Throughout the text, she discusses her method of collecting paper, as a way to sell it for money. Also getting food from the slaughterhouse garbage, or from, people who are giving out food, or being able to barter with others in the favela, or collecting cans and bottles and refurbishing them and selling them. And again, this notion of trade as well that's happening, which can show like a mini system, like mini economic systems. And even thinking of other people that are there, like the junk dealer, or like people that she talks about that buy these things off of her, right? And so I really show that even though there is this plight in the favelas, that there's these economic methods that exist outside of the traditional economic system. And so while there isn't access to a traditional job, or cost of living, or being able to leave the favela, and it really underlines again like this plight of living in favelas, it does highlight a level of resilience despite the circumstances. And so while again she expresses exhaustion and reflects on these responsibilities, she often compares those moments of exhaustions of the people that she doesn't want to be, right? And how she wants to still provide for her children, and she has hope and she has desires for herself, even in the times where she feels like she is not able to even have room to have hope and desire. And she doesn't succumb to anger or resentment in those moments where she is. You can still see that she's having those moment of reflections, and it really fuels her, wanting to write and be able to express herself. And so another major theme throughout the text that I thought was really significant is the idea of political accountability. And Carolina really talks about throughout the text this idea of, not even idea, but this critique of where's the political accountability for political leaders who claim to bring resources and to bring help and to essentially give to those in favelas who help put them in power, and that there's a lack of social economic resources for those living in the favelas as well. And so two major quotes that I thought were really significant was the first, which is on page 24, on the idea of running for councilman and then coming in the favelas and being with the community and spending time and talking to people. And, you know, she often brings up this idea of like the promise, right? This promise to, you know, come back, but even this promise to even give to the favelas and to help people in the favelas, and then they disappear once they're in office. And I really love the way that she wrote that she classifies Sao Paulo as this palace. The governor's palace is the living room, the mayor's office is the dining room, the city is the garden, and the favela is the backyard where they throw the garbage. And this really idea that the favela is in the outskirts and that they're not even a part of the city. And on a page 123, she states that politicians use their platform, promise they'll give you raises. The people find out soon enough that they're suffering. It's their suffering that was raised. And so this idea of not being held accountable to follow through. But the combination of her critique of the need for political accountability, along with the ways that she describes the favelas and the idea of being on the outskirts and being outside, it really made me think of the idea of citizenship, because citizenship is to be a full participant, right? And so what does it mean for favelas to be on the outskirts of the city? What does it mean for them to be able to contribute to the, you know, political gains of people, but not being able to reap access, right? And so I think that's a question that hopefully we can discuss. But I really wanted to ask that and others, see if others think about how does the diary of daily life challenge this idea of full citizenship in Sao Paulo, and how speaking on the daily life of people in favelas, of herself, but also of others, really shows how this plight can really challenge this idea that people have full citizenship in Brazil. Thank you.